Welcome to this How Do I video, in which I will demonstrate how to configure the Excel add-in in Microsoft Dynamics NAV. In Dynamics NAV, users can work with data in Excel, get fresh data from Dynamics NAV and update the data in Dynamics NAV based on their work in Excel. But this requires you to configure the Microsoft Dynamics NAV server instance in your deployment first. We'll get there by going through these steps. In step 1, I will discuss the prerequisites. In step 2, we will create an application in the Azure Management Portal. In step 3, we will grant access to the application. In step 4, we will configure OAuth authentication. And in step 5, we will configure the NAV service tier. So in the first step, we need to make sure that our deployment meets the following prerequisites. You need to use Azure Active Directory to authenticate users. We need SSL or Secure Sockets Layer for authentication for SOAP and OData web services. And if your deployment is multi-tenant, Dynamics NAV web client must accept host names for tenants. When we meet all of the requirements, you are ready to create an application in the Azure Management Portal. You can go to the portal using this URL. In the Applications view, you need to add an application, and you can use the Add Application wizard to do it. Let's have a look. In your Office 365 Administration Center, you can go to the Admin Centers to the bottom, and there you select Azure Active Directory. And now you will end up in your Azure Active Directory administration. In here, you can have a look at the available applications if you want to. By clicking on applications, and what you need to do is you need to add a new application, not one from the gallery, but a new empty application. You need to provide a name. In this case, I'm just typing in something. Select the web application, and then you click on the next button, in which you need to enter the sign-on URL and an ID. So we are in the process of creating the application. We provide a name as it will display to our users, for example, Excel add-in for Dynamics NAV. The type needs to be web application or web app. And for the URL, you need a URI to sign in to the Microsoft Dynamics NAV web server components, in this case, the URL for your web client. In the screen where we enter the app ID URI, you enter a URL to access your Azure AD tenants. And the URI must be unique, so you can't have two applications with the same or two tenants with the same URL. For directory access, we need to select a single sign-on. So if I have a quick look here, you notice the application type is web application. Here we have the URL which links back to my web client. And if I have a look here in the configure pane, the name is Excel add-in for Dynamics NAV. I have the sign-on URL. If you want to, you can also give it a logo. Scroll down a little bit. And here I also need to enable single sign-on using this URI, which I have provided. The next step is to grant access in the configuration pane for my Azure AD application. We can add the application for Dynamics NAV, and then you need to set the delegated permissions for our Dynamics NAV application. Let me demonstrate that. So if I go back to the configuration pane of my application, I can scroll down until I see permissions for other applications. As you notice, I have already added Dynamics NAV and the delegated permissions. If that's not in here, you can click on Add Application. Then you need to show all of the applications. In here, your Dynamics NAV application should also be available. You select Dynamics NAV in this case, it will become available, and then in your Dynamics NAV application, you can grant permissions so that the Excel add-in is able to access Dynamics NAV. In our next step in the Azure portal, in the application configure page, the Manage Manifest button is used to download the manifest file and to make the necessary changes so we can enable OAuth 2. Let me demonstrate that. So here in Azure Active Directory, I select my application. I go to configuration, and now what I can do is I can have a look at my manifest file. In this case, I will download the manifest file, and then a file is generated. I can open that with a notepad. And what I need to do is look for this setting, OAuth allow implicit flow, and set it to true. By default, it will be false. Then I need to save my file somewhere, for example, on my desktop. And then next, what I need to do is I need to click again on Manage Manifest File, upload the manifest file which I have just saved in my application. Once I have that uploaded, then OAuth 2 will be enabled in our application. Next, after downloading, modifying and uploading our manifest file, you need to also have a look in your configuration in the reply URL, and then set it to this URL. So you can just type it in, and this is the reply URL that we need. The next thing to do is to configure our service tier. We can do that using the service tier manager, or you can also use a PowerShell script. We need to set the Excel add-in AAD client app ID to the client app ID that we got out of the portal. Let me demonstrate how we can do that. So in Azure Active Directory, in the properties of the Excel add-in that we are creating, what I need to do is scroll down a little bit until we notice the client ID. This client ID we need to copy, write it down, remember it. Next, what we need to do is we need to open our service tier configuration or administration tool. You need to go to the Azure Active Directory pad, open it in edit mode, and here we need to paste this client app ID that we just copied. Once we pasted the ID, you can save the settings, then you can restart the service for it to become active. To test the settings, you can go into the application and look for the assisted setup. Here you can quickly run the setup reporting wizard. Just click on the next button, create a new data set, for example, give it a name, test. What we can do is we can use a list page in this case. I will just click on next, use the default settings, publish, and then I will launch Excel. This generates the Excel file. The first time you might need to sign into your account, so you can just use your Azure Active Directory account to connect to NAV. If all goes well, the add-in will be able to connect, and what you notice is that the settings are now completed and enable this to work with NAV. Let's summarize the steps again. In the first step, I discussed the prerequisites. Then we had a look at how we can create our application in Azure Active Directory. We granted access to the application, configured OAuth by opening the manifest file, changing a setting. And then we also provided permissions, and we used the app ID to reconfigure the service tier. So in this video, we covered the following topics on how to configure and set up Dynamics NAV, the Excel add-in, for it to connect to the application. For more information, please visit the following resources. Thanks for following this short video to explain how to configure the Excel add-in in Microsoft Dynamics NAV. This video in the How Do I series for Dynamics NAV is brought to you by Microsoft and Plataan. See you in another one.